The story of America's independence begins in the mid-18th century, when 13 colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast of North America. Home to farmers, merchants, artisans, enslaved laborers, and immigrants from many nations, the colonies were diverse yet tied together by their connection to Britain. Colonists spoke the King's English, traded in British markets, and often took pride in belonging to the empire. But beneath this loyalty, tensions brewed. For decades, Britain governed the colonies through a system known as mercantilism, ensuring that colonial trade benefited the mother country. Laws like the Navigation Acts restricted commerce, but many colonists accepted these rules as the cost of imperial protection. That balance changed after the French and Indian War, which ended in 1763. Britain had won new lands, but at a staggering cost. Deep in debt, Parliament turned to the colonies for revenue. The first measures were the Sugar Act and the Stamp Act, placing taxes on goods and printed materials. Colonists protested fiercely. They argued that Parliament had no right to tax them without representation. Crowds rioted in Boston, the Sons of Liberty organized resistance, and colonial assemblies passed resolutions against the new laws. The crisis deepened with the Townshend Acts of 1767, which taxed everyday items like glass, paint, and tea. Boycotts spread, women produced homemade goods to replace imports, and resentment grew stronger. Tensions exploded in 1770, when British soldiers fired into a crowd in Boston, killing 5 colonists. The so-called Boston Massacre became a symbol of oppression, used by leaders like Samuel Adams to rally resistance. A few years later, Parliament passed the Tea Act, giving Britain's East India Company control over colonial tea sales. Many saw it as a trick to force Americans to accept unfair taxes. In December 1773, protesters disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped over 300 chests of tea into the water. The Boston Tea Party stunned Britain. Parliament struck back with the Intolerable Acts of 1774, closing Boston's port, placing Massachusetts under royal control, and allowing soldiers to be quartered in private homes. Outrage swept the colonies. For the first time, leaders from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress. They petitioned the king for relief and organized boycotts, but also pledged to defend each other's liberties. The colonies were beginning to act as one. The breaking point came in April 1775. British troops marched to Concord to seize colonial weapons, but militias stood in their way. At Lexington and Concord, gunfire erupted. The shot heard round the world. The American Revolution had begun. Soon, thousands of militiamen surrounded Boston. In June, they clashed with British forces at Bunker Hill. Though the colonists retreated, their fierce resistance proved they could stand against the world's strongest army. In Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress gathered again. They created a Continental Army and chose George Washington as its commander. At first, they still hoped for peace, sending the Olive Branch petition to King George III. But the king dismissed it, declaring the colonies in rebellion. The conflict had reached a point of no return. In early 1776, a pamphlet electrified the colonies. Thomas Paine's Common Sense argued that monarchy itself was corrupt and that America must be independent. The simple, powerful words reached ordinary people, shifting public opinion toward separation. That summer, Congress debated independence. On July 2nd, they voted to break from Britain, and 2 days later they approved Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. The document proclaimed that all men are created equal and that governments derive power from the consent of the governed. The colonies were now the United States of America. Declaring independence was bold, but winning it was another matter. Britain unleashed massive military force, capturing New York and driving Washington's army into retreat. In December 1776, Washington struck back at Trenton, crossing the icy Delaware River to win a surprise victory that revived American morale. The war raged on for years. In 1777, American forces won a major victory at Saratoga, convincing France to ally with the United States. The revolution became a global conflict with France, Spain, and the Netherlands opposing Britain. Yet hardship was constant. At Valley Forge, Washington's troops endured a brutal winter of hunger and disease, sustained only by discipline and hope. The final turning point came in 1781, when American and French forces trapped British General Cornwallis at Yorktown, Virginia. Surrounded by Washington's army on land and the French Navy at sea, Cornwallis surrendered. The war dragged on for 2 more years, but Yorktown was the last major battle. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially recognized American independence. The revolution was more than a war. It was a struggle over ideas about liberty, government, and the rights of people. Colonists had resisted not only taxes, but the principle of being ruled without consent. In challenging Britain, they created a republic founded on ideals that would inspire revolutions across the world. Why did America fight Britain? Because the colonists believed freedom was worth the risk. They defied the most powerful empire of their age, endured years of hardship, and emerged with a nation built on the promise of self-government. The road to independence was long and uncertain, but it forever changed history and proved that the pursuit of liberty can reshape the world.